Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, we will talk about functions that either return a value or don't, and how we can print the value once we return that value from a function in a couple of different ways. We'll also be talking about string functions very briefly, and how that's slightly different from integers or doubles or voids. So the first function that we're going to be talking about is called printPow, which is basically a function that is void. It takes in 3 arguments, which are integer. We're going to have a base, an exponent, and the size, or the number of times we want to run the loop that we have inside of our function. And what's happening here is that we have some integer called value, which will be assigned a value from the pow function. We're going to call pow with the inputs that are given. So whatever the user enters, we're going to use that user-defined input and generate some number raised to some exponent. We're going to store that, we're going to then print it, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to go up the exponents. So we're actually going to do this thing where we're going to increase the exponents and show a series of bases raised to increasingly higher exponents. To do this, what we will need to do is we will have to have all the variables that we will need to pass into the function defined in main so that we can get user-defined input. You can see that I'm asking for user-defined input here on these lines, which I then, once I have that information stored, I can pass to the function to actually do the operation, which is done in the loop. So let's go ahead and run this part of the code and talk about what's happening here. So we're going to enter a base, which in this, let's do a base of 2, and we're going to start with a power of 2. And let's do this up to 8 numbers. And what we can see here is that it says 2 raised to 2 is 4, 2 raised to 3 is 8, and so forth. And this goes as long as the loop can run based on size. And size here was 8. So it ran 8 times and printed everything up to 2 to the 9. And let's see here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the fact that this is a void function, right? We're not returning anything here. This is just printing information from a loop. So this would be an example of a function that is void, but takes in arguments through parameters and then prints some values. So with the next function, we've got something slightly different. We are going to be working with strings in this example briefly and talk about what's going on here. So I'll break this down into a couple of steps. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a user-defined input. So I ask, enter a word or phrase. We're going to use getLine here because we want to accommodate multiple words at a single time. If we were dealing with a single word at a time, we could use cn, but if we have any kind of spacing, we need to use getLine by default. So if I go to the function, what's going on here is we pass in that user-defined input, which we'll call word here. We're going to then ask for the word that the user is searching for. So say we enter a sentence and we are looking for a specific word. We're going to then figure out what that word is and then return that word to the user if we find it. And then what we do is we go in and we're using a couple of string built-in functions here. So we're calling the dot length on the word. So this would give us the size or the number of characters in word. This would give us a substring of the word starting from wherever we are looking, which is the index value I. So this is going through each character starting at the first one at a time. And then it's making sure that the size is always set to 5. So we know that, say we knew the size of the word we were looking for, we could set the size of the word here. And we have this check here where we basically say if the substring that we have generated is equal to what we are looking for, then what we're going to do is we're going to use a break statement. A break statement will stop the loop and go directly to the next thing outside the loop, which is the return. So this will exit the scope and go to the next thing that is on the line after the scope ends. Otherwise, we'll just use continue, which is the same thing as saying like I++, or just continue the loop. It just keeps going the way it was. So one thing to note is that when you are returning something, you can store that value and print it, or you can use a print statement to actually print the function. So what we're doing here is we're printing the return value. So notice that we're using a cout, and instead of a variable, we're actually using the function call. This is totally valid. What this means is that we're going to print whatever is stored in the function call from the return. So let's do that here with some user input. And say we're looking at the words hello CSCI 1300. And the word that we want to look for is, say, hello. We know that hello is 5 characters, so that's why I'm using hello here. I could change this function here in a sec to show you how it'll be different, but for the sake of the example, I'm going to use hello. And you can see here that we found hello, so that's why we printed hello down here. If I wanted to, I could do the same thing, but slightly differently. If I was to say, create like a output and set it equal to the call to get substring and pass in the input from the user, and then cout the output, right? So what I'm doing is I'm storing whatever gets returned from the function on this line. So we're storing the return value and then printing return value in 2 steps here. And if we did the same thing, let's actually modify this for a sec. Say I wanted to actually use the exact size of the words, no matter what it was. So we've got this word expected, which is what we're looking for. And if I just add in the dot length here for that, that would give me the exact size of whatever the word we're looking for is. So this would take any size input that we gave it now. So if I recompile this and say we're looking for like the brave dog, right? And we're looking for the word dog. We're going to get the word dog back because that's what we had expected. And the word that's printed here, dog, is coming from output because we stored the return value from the function, which was stored in the substring variable. So whatever substring contained was passed back to the function call. So this function call had the same value, the word dog. We then assigned it to the variable output and then printed that afterwards. That's all for now on using return statements in functions. Thanks and happy coding.